Hello, and welcome to Cry Havoc Wargaming, dedicated to bringing you the uncommon. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Ron, and today we're going to do a review of Dux Britanniarum by Too Fat Lardies. So let's get started. Dux Britanniarum is not a particularly new game. It came out a few years ago. If you're familiar with Too Fat Lardies games, you'll be familiar with the system. It relies a lot on shock as its morale rolls. It is a handful of dice game with a different d6 for each of the figures in a unit. The units are made out of either 6 or 4 man teams. But the thing that makes Dux Britanniarum a little different than some of their other games, besides the period, it is set in the part of British history that is sometimes referred to as sub-Roman. That is, after Rome tells the Romano-British that they should look to their own defenses. Romans start pulling their soldiers out, partially because of their own rebellions and partially to defend themselves from invaders, and Britain is left to the mercy of her enemies. Most notably, the enemies in question are the Anglo-Saxons. So this game consists of battles for Anglo-Saxons invading into Britain. Again, the mechanics are going to be very familiar to anyone who's played any Too Fat Lardies products. You roll for the amount of movement you make. It is a card-driven game like their previous games were. For the basic set, what you get is you get the book here, a paperback book with full color. Inside are the rules, of course, lots of art, both photographs of figures and some beautiful, beautiful art that add to the picture and the idea of the game. Your beginning forces are exactly the same. They're basically 30 to 40 so figures. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but a Romano-Brit army starting is going to have 2 groups of warriors, 1 of elite, Commonipilares, and 3 of leve. Adding to that, you have 4 slingers, 3 nobles, and a lord's champion. Whereas the Saxon forces begin with slightly fewer character figures. I think it's 34 and 44. A Saxon force has 3 groups of warriors, 2 elite Hearthguard, Saxon missiles, a group of 4 archers, and 3 nobles. Well, in this case, it is archers. And 3 nobles, a lord, and 2 leaders. And then there's some samples of those beginning armies right there in the book. The game begins by creating your characters themselves, and that's going to be important because what makes this game different than many of the other Too Fat Lardies, I shouldn't actually say that. They do a lot of pint-sized campaigns for Chain of Command, and there was meant to be a lot of character and feeling to Sharp Practice. It's supposed to feel like a historic novel of the period. But this game is really wrapped up tightly into its campaign system. And the campaign system is where it's going to really shine. With that in mind, you roll up your noble characters. That's the first part of the game. You decide what side you're going to play for the basic game, and that's going to either be Saxon or Romano-Brit. As I mentioned, it predetermines what armies your starting positions are. You will increase figures over the running of the campaign. Then you roll for the age, you roll for physique, you roll for reputation or the possibility of reputation, and character attributes to give you a little background for the characters. And there's charts for Saxon, Romano-British, or British-British. And that's going to be more important when you're dealing with the mountains of the West, or what we think of as Wales today, or the Old North. We'll talk a little bit more about what those things mean later. You roll for your beginning wealth. The wealth is not divided like in so many denaries. It's rather referred to by little catchy terms like a beggar's bowl, a thieves' hoard, tribune's tribute. And you roll for your king's age. Because in both cases, you're going to begin playing a lord, working your way up. There's these wonderful little period style samples of how the game is played, character descriptions of the rules. Career path, then the senior versions of those are the British Commes career path and the British King career path, and there's a Saxon career path. And these are basically how your characters achieve and raise up throughout the game. So you're going to start as a tribune or a lord. If you're a British character, you reside in the hall or a villa of the king's lands, and you are the king's military leader. You can retain a maximum of one group of elite foot soldiers. Comes with your starting army. Yeah, you have no religious leader, though a priest may join your retinue if your exploits involve you providing assistance to one. That's part of the sort of random events that can happen in the game. And you may gain promotion to Prefecturess by providing a suitable contribution to the Decuriones of the Curia and elected representatives of the local council. Basically, when you feel like you're ready and you've achieved the things you need, you pay that amount of money and you raise to the next level of Prefectus. And that's how basically moving up these charts work, until possibly you could become the king. The Saxons, similar. The Saxons' background's a little different. The Saxons are the invaders. You are a poor noble. You have a Saxon king. You're expected to pay an annual tax to that king. And of course, that means you have to gain money to do that. So you are the raiding party and you drive the initiative of the campaign. You're going to start at a Geseth or lord. You reside in the hall on the king's lands. You have obligations to the king or overlord and must pay tax each year or become an outlaw and thereby losing the campaign. That tax is a beggar's bowl, to use those descriptions earlier. You may retain a maximum of 2 groups of elite foot soldiers. That's what comes in your starting army. And you may not conquer any territory until you establish a reputation as a warlord. Your Hearthguard will declare you a great warlord once you shower them with sufficient gifts, which means paying a prefect's riches. So the Saxon, to begin the game, the Saxon is in fact not actually taking territory. He has to play a series of raids in order to collect the monies he needs and to do those things he needs to make the next jump to become a Drotin or warlord. And he can work his way up to becoming king, and he endeavors to capture territory. That's basically what he has to do. He has to play a certain number of scenarios to build him up to the title necessary to be a warlord. And then he can start actually playing battles instead of raids to try to conquer territory and thereby to take over provinces and eventually a kingdom from the Romano-Brets. That's his goal. There's no requirement for paperwork in this campaign. I have character sheets I use, a simple character sheet, kind of like you'd have in a role-playing game, and everything I need to manage my Romano-Brits for the club's campaign are on that one sheet. You don't have to keep track of where your forces are deployed. They're assumed to be in the right place where they need to be as the time comes. Campaign structure is set around calendar months. You only portray or actually play out the campaign season, which is from March until October, giving you 8 months of possible contact. You don't fight in the winter months. So you keep track of the time, you keep track of your character's wealth, you keep track of what's in his army at any given time and the condition of that army. Because that's going to be how the campaign aspect of the game works. At the end of each game, you determine the condition. It's based on the winner. But you roll the check and see the condition of the winner, how long it takes him to recover from his injuries, the chart. Well, let's go in the order of how the game works. So, as I mentioned, the Saxons have to begin with raids. There's a series of raids here in the game. I think there's 6. There's some more available, are going to be available soon. My friend Mike Whitaker of the Old Mill in Britain has been working on a compendium for this game, which is really exciting and is really going to add a lot of fun to the game. It changes a little bit how battles work if you want to use that. It adds a couple of new raids. It gives some terrain rolling charts for rolling up your terrain in ways that fit to the different kingdoms and areas that make up this sub-Roman Britain. And it's just got a lot of nice new... Oh, it also has rule clarifications. If there's a problem with this book, it is that it is a Too Fat Lardies product, and it is one of the older ones. So sometimes it's a little confusing. Sometimes things aren't where you expect them to be. So the compendium is going to be really useful for that, too. But let's go back to how the battle works, and then we'll go along from there. So these raids basically give you a couple of things to do, assignments. They set up how the table's going to work, who's going to come on when, what's going to happen when. I mentioned earlier that it is a card-driven game. The basic book set, you can get it, I think, without the cards, but why would you? Though the cards are available online, so you could print them yourself. But there's a number of cards. There's basically 2 decks of cards that come with the game. And that is the game deck itself. These are the ones that have the cover of the book printed on the back of the card, the helmet and the Dux Britanniarum. These cards basically work like the tokens or the cards in Sharp Practice do. They have the name of various characters or units that activate upon that card. Much like Sharp Practice, you activate by pulling a card, you get that character, and you can activate the figures that are under his command, the big guy's command. That's going to be a noble and usually 2 lords. I mentioned there was a champion earlier. The champion has a slightly different role. He usually is attached to the same unit that the noble is, and in a normal raid, he's just an extra guy adding dice to your attacks. He has another role that we'll get back to when we actually talk about battles. What is different, there is no Tiffin card or turn end like they have in both either with the role in Chain of Command or with the Tiffin card in Sharp Practice. Here, you basically just play through the cards. So everyone is going to get to activate each turn. You don't have somebody left unactivating like you might in a normal game, unless you have units that get too far away. And even they get a limited action to respond if they're out of leadership range from one of your lords. But the other difference is I think the first card I showed you was a British missiles card. There's British missiles and there's javelin or skirmishers. Your skirmishers and your missiles are 4-man units. Cavalry is also 4-man units. I think there may be a new cavalry card too. We'll have to look at the new deck. Those units can activate on those cards. They're meant to be self-thinking and self-directed and disconnected from the actual leadership and command. So they have cards that they activate on themselves. And that is the game deck. And you're going to be randomly pulling these out of the deck and flipping them over like you would. Just Sharp Practice. Or any of their older games. Things like Through the Mud and Blood or what is it, Not Shot Yet, or Charlie Don't Surf. The other cards is the Fate deck. The Fate deck works more like the random events or the special skills that some mutants in Sharp Practice have that you would activate with your command flags. I hope some of you play Sharp Practice and have some idea what I'm talking about. But here you have cards that do this sort of thing. A handful of these cards are only put in the deck with certain events that happen in battles. And so again, we'll come back to that later. You also are going to start your hand with certain cards. The 2 sides have special cards that they always start the game with, and that kind of matches the way they tend to work in the field. For instance, the Romano Brits will start the game with, if I remember right, a shield wall braced card. The main difference between these 2 sides in the beginning game is the Romano Brits are more disciplined. They're typically on movement trays in rank and file, and they can form shield walls. Saxons tend to be slightly better, having 2 Hearth Guards in their starting unit and not a bunch of, in fact, no levy in the basic game. They typically are either not based on movement trays or they use those mob sort of melee trays. In fact, the first time I ever saw mob melee movement trays being created, it was for this game by war bases, but now they're common with a few games. So that's the big difference in how they work in the field. The Saxon army is a little bit better as far as their individual skills as soldiers may go, their armor and their fighting abilities, but they're less disciplined, less orderly. They're not Romans. The cards have things like shield wall braced, which makes the shield wall stronger. Fear, aggressive charge. I think that's the one that the Saxons get to begin with. I should also mention the cards have suits, and that's a little misleading. That's a confusing part of the game. They'll either have a boar, like this aggressive charge card has, or they will have, I think they call it a dragon, but it sure looks like a griffin to me. It's sort of a Welsh dragon, I guess. and that is for the Romano Brits. Either side can play either suit card. The suits, while the suits are designed, as I kind of alluded to just now, for a particular side, and often the skill that comes with it leans towards the play style of one of those two sides, but in reality all the suit means is it has to be played on your turn. Some of the other cards you can play in reaction to other people's moves and things. So those are the fate cards, the basic fate cards. Again, like I say, they do a lot of the kind of thing. You have these in your hands and they give you some options of things you can take advantage of, kind of the way you do the things like Sharp Practice in Sharp Practice. That's how the cards work. The game is played pretty much like any other game of theirs that I said. You know, you start by pulling the cards. The cards tell you who you can go. You decide what they're going to do. You roll on dice for how far they're going to go or not go. You roll on various charts. That's probably something worth talking about, because that's one of the ways they make up for this being a melee-oriented game instead of a gunpowder-oriented game. And the other two movies, the other two games I keep mentioning are in fact set in a gunpowder period. Some of the things that are different than a normal game of theirs. When you activate, all troops in the group or formation may move, or if in contact with the enemy, fight. Groups of foot soldiers or shock cavalry may form or leave a formation. Foot soldiers or cavalry in an existing combat will fight immediately. Harassing troops or light cavalry, those are the skirmishers, harassing troops, or light cavalry may move and make an attack with missiles. Undertake an action such as looting, building, or interacting with the local community. So it's not like most of Sharp Practice games where you might have like two things you can do. You can move and shoot. The harassing troops or light cavalry can move and make an attack with missiles. The harassing troops are the only ones that really, and light cavalry are the only ones that have missiles. Everybody else needs to get into fisticuffs, as Sharp Practice would call it. Like Sharp Practice, you can form formations. That makes it easier to move them. The formations are very limited. It is either mass formation. Mass formation is just a big clump of guys, or the linear formation of the Romano Brits, and they can then move in closer to become a shield wall, which way increases their benefits. Crossing obstacles are pretty much what you're used to. Facing zone of influence is a little different. You cannot come within 4 inches of the front of an enemy's unit unless you are fighting them, or you play a goad card, which is one of the fate cards, and that stops that unit from reacting and lets you in. Similar fashion, you can usually only play 1 card on a turn, but there is a card called Carpe Diem that lets you play multiple cards and do some other pretty clever. It's the only way you can actually flank or attack somebody unit from the right, because any unit is assumed to turn and face you unless they're trapped and can't. So the only way to attack a formation that is not engaged from the flank or the rear is by playing a Carpe Diem card. So when you go to hit somebody, instead of it being based on cover, like it is in the other two games that I keep mentioning, it is based whether you cause a hit or shock is caused by their rank. Levy, warrior, companion, missiles, or skirmishers. So that's a little bit different. A lot more rules on combat, close combat, because it's such an important part of the game, and you have to know who gets overlap or who doesn't, how you treat multiple units coming into the same unit. A lot more rules into that and how to figure that out. But nothing is going to be shocking and unknown to you. After close combat, you're going to roll for what basically occurs to the guys, to the force morale. It uses force morale just like their other games. I should mention this. They use shock. You keep track of the shock. They'll receive wounds or shock when they're fighting. You split it amongst units in a formation like you do in most of their games. But in this game, who gets to decide how the odd numbers go, instead of being based on whether they're in cover or out of cover, as in Chain of Command. In this game, it is based on whether if the unit is in shield wall or not. If it's in shield wall, then the unit shield wall that determines where the excess goes. And if they are not, then it does not. Also, I should mention, because this isn't a strictly formation period, when you form these formations, you might have them on movement trays, but they're not stuck in those rectangles. So you could, for instance, have a line of 6 of one, say, warriors, a line of 6 warriors standing in front of a line of 6 Hearthguard, instead of 2 blocks next to each other like it would be in most of their games. And there's some advantages to that. When you have twice as many points as of shock as you have surviving characters in your unit, that's called misplacing one's amphora, and that's the route. They don't seem to have a term the way they do, the something bad happens table. It has a something bad happens table, but it doesn't give it a name. When certain things happen, when a unit is routed, when lords are killed, you roll on this table, and that's going to affect your force morale, which can end up costing you the game. These raids follow, and for the most part, the battles will follow the same kind of things you're used to if you've played any Too Fat Lardies game. What is a little different is the post-game phase. The way the game's going to end is, in order to end the game voluntarily, one player must declare that he is withdrawing from the action. To do this, he must leave by any table edge to which he has an uncontested route. If the game is a raid and the player has achieved all of his scenario objectives, this could result in him winning a victory. If the game is a battle, the side that withdraws automatically surrenders the victory to their opponent. So it'll all be a loss. One side's force morale level, if it reaches 0, the game will end immediately, so you don't have a choice to do a voluntary removal then. But you can decide earlier. In either of the above cases, the retiring player's opponent may allow the player to withdraw unchallenged, or if his own force morale level is at 3 or above, he may challenge the withdrawal. A force with a force morale level of 2 cannot, or less, cannot challenge an opponent wishing to withdraw. So what that means, when a voluntary withdrawal is challenged, the game is played on until all withdrawing sides' forces have left the table. With an involuntary withdrawal caused by one side's force morale reaching 0, then the post-game events are worked out with the loser having no retreat cards, see below. And that's a hint of the next thing, the no retreat cards. I don't know if I showed one already that showed this, but a number of these cards, the fate cards, is something you have to keep in mind when you're considering using your cards. Some of them, like this one here, it says Pursuit down on the bottom there. And there are others, this one says Pursuit or Retreat. In the post-game phase, you add up, the person retreating adds up the retreat cards they have and compares them to the pursuit cards that the non-withdrawing side has. Player contesting the withdrawal totals the number of pursuit cards that he holds, whilst the loser totals the number of retreat cards. This represents a noble's ability to hold their force together in retreat or to polish off their fleeting foe in pursuit. If the withdrawing player has the same number or more retreat cards than the opponent has pursuit cards, then he is able to withdraw after the battle in good order. However, if the pursuer has more pursuit cards than his opponent has retreat cards, this will adjust the level of victory by 1 point each in his favor for each pursuit card more than he has than his opponent has retreats. So that goes to the next part of the end phase, and that is the results table. That's the results table there. And this basically gives you a certain amount of points. Basically, you add these together to find out what the end result's going to be and who is the victor and who is the loser. And then you check one of these two charts. This is either the raid results or the battle results. You look up the amount of points by which you won, and then that tells you what happens to the winner. Let's say 4. You gain sufficient followers to replace light or moderate losses from this battle in 1 month and heavy losses in 2 months, as well as gaining 2 volunteer warriors to add to one of your groups and gain a Thieves' Hoard. So it's going to take that group a month or 2 months, depending on how many losses they had, to recover. That's how long it'll take them before they can initiate another combat. Remember, you have 8 months of campaign seasoning. You're going to get a Thieves' Hoard to add to your plunder, and 2 volunteer warriors are going to join you. The loser goes to the loser side of the chart, and for everything up to that one, the loser would replace light losses in 1 month, moderate or heavy losses in 2 months. So you can see The loser is going to take a little longer to recover, typically, than the winner. And this is kind of how the taking provinces is going to work, or how it's going to be affected. If the Saxons have recovered in 1 month and the Romano-Brits are taking 2 months, and the Saxon can decide to attack in a month's time when he's got his soldiers back, and then the Romano-Brit has to either decide to fight a weakened force, and because he's got a weakened force, a lower starting force morale. So it's real disadvantage. Or he leaves that province undefended, which, as you may imagine, is also a problem. If you are attacking where there is no defense, you can start trying to take over a province. Basically, the way that works is by besieging any defensive positions they may have. Those are either going to be on your map when you start, or they're going to be things you have built during the game. The sieges are played entirely abstractly. Let's say you have strengthened town walls. The Saxon's going to roll on this chart, and it says he's got 1d6 plus 2 months it's going to take him. So he'll roll that dice. He knows how long it's going to take. Both sides know how long it's going to take. And he's going to wait for that amount of turns to pass. In the meantime, the Romano-Brit can attempt to overturn that siege, not by actually fighting a siege battle, but instead fighting a battle, which is considered to be him attacking the force and its reaction. And if he wins that battle, he can break the siege. If he doesn't win that battle, the siege continues, the time goes on. If you lose your provinces, there's a chance for civil war can be breaking out. There's various enhancements you can buy for your kingdoms. I think I kind of alluded to that when I talked about buying upgrades to your defenses, but there's other things you can buy as well. And then there's your regular annual events, the Saxon's taxes that he has to pay until he takes a province, the possibility of disease, the possibility of death of your nobles, and then any donations you might want to make, which often have to do with things that you need to gain in your direction, your levels up. Now, I basically was talking about how raids work. Once the Saxon has taken is a warlord, then you start actually fighting battles, and battles are how you gain terrain. And the battles work exactly the same as the raids, except they're not as well defined in the original book. There's an alteration in a new way of playing battles in the compendium that, one, turns the table on its side, and two, creates objectives to the battles. But right now it's just force versus force. But what is different, very different, between a battle and the raids is, one, you can hire mercenaries, but there's also a different pre-game, or an added step in the pre-game sequence, and that is choices that you can make before the battle. And this is one of the things that where the champions that I kind of alluded I'd come back to would be affected. It's also where those extra fate cards can go into the deck, and that is because the beginning of the game, pre-game initiative. The pre-game phase is played 2 stages. At the start of the game, both sides roll a d6 to determine who has the initiative for the pre-game phase. You can initiate single combat between the champions. There's Bibimus. You can provide mead, ale, or inspiring beverages to your men, and that causes Bibimus cards to get added to the fate deck. Those are really good. If you're the one who earned them, if you're the one who gave booze to your army and you play them, they give you benefits and help you. If your opponent plays them against you, they give you the disadvantages that alcohol can have. So I love the fact that those can do either. There's also, you can consult the gods. You can make a rousing speech. These things all help add to your abilities in a battle and really help give the feel of the period to that battle. But otherwise, the battles are played pretty much the same as anything else by the basic rules. Beautiful map that comes with the original game. The original game comes with the rule book, the cards that I already mentioned, and this beautiful map that divides England up into the various kingdoms. And these kingdoms are explained in the book in sort of locations. So I think I mentioned the mountains of the West earlier, for instance. You pick one of these kingdoms. Let's go to the mountains of the West, because I keep saying it. So mountains of the West is basically Wales. And it divided up into Powys, Gwent, I'm probably pronouncing these wrong, I should have gone with Glywysing, Demetia, Ceredigion, Gwynedd. These are the basic kingdoms. The kingdoms on the map that comes in this book breaks those up into various provinces with little dotted lines. How many provinces you have in your kingdom that you start the Romano-Brits in is the determination for how long the campaign will last. Because the more provinces, the longer it's going to take for the Saxons to take it and win the game. There's a little description of each of those kingdoms, and also a suggestion on what year you should begin your campaign to make it fit in with the history of the actual Saxon rebellions. So that's the basis of the whole setup. I'm not sure why the game hasn't been more popular than it has been. It does really, I think, play best with the campaign system. That's where the magic of the game is in that campaign system. So I wouldn't neglect it as a campaign. I might, if I get to figure out how to do it, I may do a small campaign of it here online to give you a feel for the game. I own Saxons and Romano Brits, so I may get an opportunity to do that. I'm not promising. But it is, I think, best if you use the campaign system, and that's really where the strength of the game is. And maybe that's part of why it hasn't taken off more, or why it seems to sort of shadow behind some of the other Too Fat Lardy games. It may also be the fact that they came out with Infamy, which is basically it's sort of the same idea. It's set earlier. It's either in the Republic or the Empire of Rome in its various Celtic wars, and you decide which Celtic war you want to do. A lot of the feel of Infamy does seem to stem from this, with more distinction on the level of difference between those two cultures. In fact, you can play that as a Civil War, Roman Civil War game, but my understanding is it's much better if you don't, because you lose a whole lot of the feel of dealing with a small number of highly professional Roman soldiers fighting large numbers of roving wild Celts. Speaking of Celts, I should probably mention the supplement, which I haven't really talked about. Raiders for Dux Britanniarum does a couple of things. Most notably, it opens it up to no longer be just a two-player campaign, which really Dux Britanniarum was meant to be, with one Romano Bret and one Saxon. This opens it up so you can play multiple people in several different arrangements. It also invites some new Raider character types. So this has Picts, Irish, and Scots. It allows for their starting armies and for their increase and for their charts on how they proceed. It gives, I forgot it today, but it gives a map of the area, a color map like the one I showed you for Britain, of the area where this is set. And this is an area further north. It's like Yorkshire or something, all the way up into Scotland. In fact, well beyond not only the Hadrian's Wall, but the Antonine Wall. Our campaign is being set in what's called, well, it's basically the very edge of the Old North, which is the area between Hadrian's and Antonine. Some of these raiding groups are really interesting and fun, and it introduces an idea of honor for them. They work quite a bit differently than the Saxons and the Romano Brits do. They also extend a Old North group of Brits, so you can start with a cavalry unit and to better equal the men that were in this area of the Old North, and also to better fight the Raiders. The Raiders all begin with some cavalry, which was not the case in Dux Britanniarum. So again, a very good addition. And if you've got any group of people wanting to play, a larger group or wanting to do a campaign, this is a really good addition, and this is what we'll be doing as well. It comes with its own set of cards. I kind of hinted at already the British Skirmisher card. It came with new cards to add to the old deck of terms they have changed. So there's British Cavalry, Saxon Cavalry, and British and Saxon Skirmishers. I thought there was a new cavalry card. But it also gives cards for both play cards and fate deck cards that are specifically to add those new units into the game. I kind of alluded to the compendium. That's a project that Mike Whitaker has been working on for some time. It's been held up because of private, health issues with his family. But I think it's eventually going to come out. It's really going to add to this game. I really recommend this game. I have no idea why it hasn't been more popular, why it made a big spark when it came on. Even here on YouTube, there's only There's a few channels that have covered it, and they've only typically done 1 or 2 of the raids before they let it go away. I don't know whether they continued playing and just stopped filming it or what happened. But it is a very interesting game, and that's part of why I wanted to talk about it, is I think it's worthy of a look. I hope you might be interested. If you are interested or do want to know more about it, I hope you'll go ahead and put questions in the comment section down below. Also, if you have any ideas for further content you'd like to see us produce here on Cry Havoc Wargaming, we look at the comment section for that as well. If you found this video interesting or at all useful, I hope that you'll hit like. And if you'd like to continue to receive notifications for videos like this one, or other videos that may help you determine how to better spend your time or money in your tabletop wargaming hobby, then I hope you'll hit subscribe and ring our notification bell. Till next time, cheers.